another episode of Accreditation TV. We're fast approaching the 1 year anniversary of the first one of these, what we did back in 2025, July. I think it was July 10th. So it's kind of crazy to think about. We've been doing this for a year. I'm going to do something special coming up here pretty soon. So anyway, welcome. Today we're going to talk about food services in the kitchen, and I'm happy to have our two folks that really need no introduction. In fact, if you were here a couple weeks ago, you saw Sue, and you know Sue very well. My partner at MSL, Sue McLaughlin, and Howard Nussman, who is a guy that I've known for many, many years, and taught me a lot about kitchen surveys.
A long time. When not to eat the food.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about it actually this morning as we were kind of preparing for this. And I'm like, yeah, one of the things I learned early on and when I was a very young surveyor was when you plan the building tour on day one and they say, well, where do you want to go and when? I always used to say, let's go to the kitchen right after lunch on the last day. Because you just, you don't really want to know until then. You need to eat. And but anyway, so for those of you joining that are part of our Ready Now Connect and want your CECs, make sure you jump over there and get those. We're happy to have you all here today. I'm going to try to keep these to 30 minutes as much as we possibly can. And if you're not a member of the Ready Now Connect community, let us know. We'd love to have you. So let's get started and talk a little bit about food services. And Howard, I'm going to start with you. Oh, by the way, I always do this wrong. Yeah, almost every time. If you want to ask questions, if you look at the bottom of the screen, there's actually, I think for a lot of people, there's a little 3-dot thing that says more, and that's where you're going to find the Q&A option there, and that's what we can actually see here during the live event. So if you want to ask questions live, please put it there. Otherwise, we'll do our best to answer them after the fact. So we look forward to having your questions. Now, that I interrupted myself there rudely. Now I'll get back to you, Howard. We were talking about, this is essentially about the tour of food services, but you said even before that, from a clinical perspective, you guys have some documents. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And I would encourage everyone, if you haven't already, look at the kitchen tracer that's in the survey process guide. And print that out, but study that carefully. Everything we're going to talk about today is in that document, as well as the module for food services, because they're very specific about some things they want to see. Some of it's policies and procedures. Obviously, forever, we have looked for the diet manual. And so we'll talk about that just briefly. There are some HR kinds of things that you might want to look for that I'll mention, and certainly evidence that there's a QA and PI process. But specific policies and procedures, I'm just going to mention a few of them because, again, they give you all this in that survey process guide. But definitely they're going to want to see, and this is likely just going to happen in a conversation with the dietitian and the food service manager, but your policy and procedure about diet orders. And how do we make sure that we have an order for those for each patient for the diet that they're to receive, and then that they get one that is accurate based on that order. They also delineate in their list of policies and procedures tray delivery system. And there are a couple of things that I see. Hospitals will have an event where patients scheduled for surgery, they're NPO, and they still get a tray. And so your policy and procedures should address, so how do we make sure that if the order has been changed, we have the most current order for that patient's diet, and if they are NPO, that we don't make that mistake. And the other thing is that coordination that has to happen in tray delivery with nursing if the patient's on insulin, because if the protocol on the unit is to get the blood sugar and look at the sliding scale for the insulin prior to the patient eating, then we have to know, so what's the communication mechanism between nursing and food services to be sure we don't deliver the tray and the patient eats before that blood sugar is drawn. And then there are a few policies and procedures that for me, as I'm going through doing a mock survey, and I love to do the kitchen actually, and it's not because they hand out samples. Just they're always a good group of people, and do great work. But if there's any question about attire and the hygiene practices of the staff, they're going to ask, show me what your policy is. If somebody has, I don't have to worry about this, but if somebody's got a big head of hair, um, and they're containing it in a ball cap, um, and the surveyor was made to put on a hairnet, you know, they might say, well, show me what your policy says about that. And I've even gone so far as to say, show me what the state health department says your policy should say. And, so you want to be sure that there's alignment between what your staff are doing, what your policy says, and what the state health department says as far as hygiene and their attire.
Yeah.
Steve, are you going to say something?
Well, I was just you mentioned the state health department. And they are different. Usually, there may be a little bit of a bar above sometimes. Um, do you typically ask to see that report from the last visit?
Surveyors are told that they can take a look at that. It's in that in the survey process guide. I do if I get a sense that there are issues because I'm with anything because I want to see did the state health department point that out, and then we don't have then it's an accountability issue. Um, so yeah, sometimes I will do that, and especially on asking for those guidelines, a joint commission surveyor is not going to know those guidelines. So they would likely ask, what does your state health department require? Know that a CMS surveyor knows them inside out.
Yeah.
They don't have to look them up because they're just that's part of their thing. So if there's any issues with the attire, if there's any issues that I find around sanitation, how often the red buckets with the sanitizing solution are changed, who's supposed to do that, or if I just feel that the kitchen is not as clean as it could be, I'll say, show me, what are your sanitation, your policies and procedures around sanitation, so we can see, are you doing what your policy says, or is it that the policy is not specific enough? And maybe we should do things more frequently. And then because a really good surveyor is going to check certain processes in the kitchen, like if you are cooking food and you're going to then freeze it, there's very specific guidelines for that process and how you cool it down before you put it in the freezer, and all that has to be documented. And I want to make sure, if I'm not seeing that staff understand that process or how to thaw food properly, then I'll say, show me those policies and procedures. But those are things that the guidelines say you should have these things documented clearly. And then there's an HR related or a couple of HR things like what are your expectations? What is the policy in terms of serve safe certification? Often people say, well, we have to have at least one person, and that's the policy they go by. Some will say everyone who's been in our works in our kitchen for at least by the sixth month, then they're going to be certified. There's not a requirement, I think, except to have at least one person. But I always just check to see if everybody's going to be certified. Then let's make sure that we have followed through with that on the newest employees. So they might ask for that documentation.
Uh-huh.
So those are some things that, and again, I just encourage you to use the whole survey guide and the module on food services to look for specific documents that are required. But those are kind of things that jump out at me as sometimes an issue.
Yeah, and I would say even if you're a D&D hospital, you could take basically those same things and apply them. I mean, it's universal. It's really not just Joint Commission
That's
specific.
right.
I mean, all those are requirements, and starting with the state health requirements, I think is a really good starting place. And you're right that the CMS surveyors will absolutely know those rules,
Yes.
which is kind of unfair. But Sue, I know from a physical environment perspective, we look at things a little bit differently. There's obviously some crossover like cleanliness and things, but what are some of the things is when you walk into the kitchen, you're thinking about and looking for?
Well, probably the first thing that most surveyors will think about when they're walking into the kitchen is life safety. And there's a lot of things that we look at with respect to life safety that I'll go into in just a moment. I want to say also to piggyback on what Howard said, we're looking at some documents too prior to coming to the kitchen. All of the maintenance testing and inspection for the kitchen fire extinguishing system, for cleaning the hoods, and all of that sort of stuff. We will have looked at that documentation before we even get there. But once we get there, I think the primary target that we tend to go to first is the stove and the grill area where they're actually cooking the food. And there's a lot to look at there with respect to life safety. And the most common question that frankly is not answered correctly, probably more often than not, is to ask someone who is working there, what would you do if there was a fire on your grill or if a fire on your gas stove or whatever? And what the the correct response is that your suppression system should automatically come on. If it does not come on automatically, then you're asked to go show me where you start that manually. There will be someplace in nearby that has a pull, usually it's a pull ring on it to start that suppression system. And then and only then, you look for your Class K fire extinguisher, and then you can use the Class K fire extinguisher only after the suppression system has activated. Now, there's a lot of requirements about that Class K fire extinguisher. It has to have a designated placard over that saying that the suppression system has to come on first. The extinguisher has to be located within 30 feet of the grill or the stove surface, and they have to be able to come up with all of that. It's an always question and an often failed question. While are at that cooking area, we have to look to see if they have a deep fat fryer. And if they do, it has to be separated from the grill by either, I believe it's a 16-inch horizontal space or an 8-inch baffle. So it has to be separated from any force of or any source of ignition um, by particular requirements there too. So that's something else we'll check. Another thing, while we're still there, is in the suppression system, we have um, nozzles above the cooking surfaces that need to activate. Now, those have to be aimed at a particular place on the grill. They can't be shooting over the edges and all of this sort of thing. So we have to look at how those nozzles are positioned, and you will be cited if they're not aimed appropriately. Um, Now, what we also look at with in that regard is, do you have any chocks or otherwise tethering of the cooking equipment, the stoves and so forth, so that if they're pulled out to clean behind them, um, what um, how are they returned to the same place so that the nozzles are appropriately aimed? So all of that is looked at in that cooking space. We look at cleanliness in that area as well. If the backsplash behind these pieces of cooking equipment is very dirty, if the hood is full of grease, you know, the next question is, when was the last time you maintained it? How often do you maintain it? Same for cleanliness of just the backsplash and everything else. How often are you cleaning this? And then, you may get a suggestion that you need to do it a little bit more often. So that is probably the biggest focus area first thing in the kitchen. So, um, other things that the life safety surveyor is looking at in the kitchen is things, that would normally be looked at anywhere. Um, it could be circuit breaker boxes, ceiling tiles, walls, and floor damage, and that sort of thing. So that's also looked at throughout the kitchen. Um, and there are some other issues that are evaluated as well, and we'll maybe get into that in just a minute or two.
Yeah, you made me realize that I'm not the typical physical environment surveyor because the first thing that I think about when I get to the kitchen is where's the banana pudding, and then I start thinking about life safety. Uh, but, yeah, w- one of the most frequent, and unfortunately true, one of the most frequent things is where the suppression heads are in alignment with the cooking
Right,
equipment.
right.
Too,
We
and
talk.
very
Yes.
common finding. So, thank you, Sue. Howard, I know you guys do your own tour, right? I mean, you go down and you kind of double dip, and the life safety person, physical environment person goes, and then the
Right.
clinical person goes. But um,
Right.
tell us a
Yeah.
little bit what you look for.
Okay. So I always refer to it as the 50-cent tour. Um, I will be looking at the attire, for the staff, and I will also be looking, and Sue was talking about cleanliness, and I mean, for me, it's a huge thing. And so how they sanitize those stainless steel surfaces is important. Most organizations are using that red bucket system. And the key things there are, where do you store the bucket when you're not using it? And it cannot be on the shelf, on the table where you're preparing food. It has to go on the shelf underneath. But then there's what does that water look like? How often do you change that water? And if you're mixing the chemicals, did you mix the sanitizing solution to the right concentration? And I will test that every time. And the common findings, one is that it fails the test. So that means that either we weren't mixing the chemical correctly, or it's been in that bucket too long. Um, or the other thing is that the test strips that they're going to test with expired a long time ago. Um, the I don't know why the manufacturers print that expiration so tiny, but sometimes we have to pass it around for several people to figure out what is that expiration date, but it will often be expired. What I'm seeing most recently is people getting away from the buckets and going to a container of sanitizing wipes. And they are, they're out there available. Um, I have seen just online in some of the chatter among hospitals to be sure and check that the chemical that is in there and what it will kill matches your state health department requirements. So apparently there are some out there that, are going to clean the surface, but are not going to kill a sufficient amount of the bacteria and the germs on the surface. But they are, I think, a nice, solution to the red bucket solution issue. But you also have to, as we go into other clinical departments, and we ask, so what's the dwell time? What's the contact time on that when you use that wipe? And how do you make sure if it's 30 seconds or if it's 2 minutes, for whatever that contact time is, that it's going to stay wet for that amount of time? always going to go to where they're doing the pot washing and the dish machine. Um, when you got a three sink pot washing station, again, you've got a solution that has to be at the right concentration in order to sanitize the things that you're cleaning there. So I will test that every time, and it often the water needs to have been changed, the solution replaced. In those stations. And then with the dish machine, it's a major part of your sanitizing function in the kitchen. And I'll, chat with the staff who are working in the dish room to see, do they know what's actually sanitizing? Is it temperature or is it chemicals? And it's often both. Sometimes it's one or the other. And then I'll say, okay, so show me how you know with each run that we've got the right temperatures being reached, or that the chemical solutions are in fact what they need to be, and I'll get them to show me the logs. um, and I'm not just looking that all the blanks are filled. I'm looking to see if it falls out with the temperature. If it falls outside the range, then what did you do about that? And so I would encourage you, check your log to be sure it has a place to document what's the action if the temperature fell outside of the range for the dish machine. Um, I've mentioned about the policy and procedure for thawing food, or for going from, we've just cooked this batch of soup and now we're going to take it all the way into the freezer, and the specific process for cooling it within a certain time frame. And I will ask to see the documentation on the last several things that they took it off the stove and then cooled it down to go into the freezer, to be sure they're documenting that properly, because that is a requirement. Um, and uh, Refrigerator, freezer temperatures, we'll check to be sure they're monitoring those. And now most hospitals are going to, a device on all of the food refrigerators across the organization, and medication refrigerators across the organization being monitored centrally.
Yeah.
And if that's happening, I want to make sure it's actually happening.
Yeah.
You want to say something?
Well, it's just I see a lot of that, and one of the biggest challenges with those setups is that um, where what is the alarm point set for? If you open the door, especially a small refrigerator like on a unit in a patient room, you open the door, the temperature in that refrigerator is going to go up rapidly. Of course, it'll also chill back down rapidly as soon as you close the door. If you open it up and you're looking around for something or you're restocking it, chances are it's going to go into alarm. So, what does the policy say about
Hmm. Hmm.
when do they actually respond to those alarms? It's but because they become nuisance alarms really fast. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
It's
so
easy for the staff on the nursing units or in an ambulatory setting, wherever you're, remotely tracking temperature, to say, oh, well, in the pharmacy, they're monitoring those temperatures for the medications. In the dietary department, they're monitoring those temperatures on the food refrigerators. And then you find, well, yeah, it's on a computer, that someone can go open up their laptop and go and check that, but no one's doing it. And
yeah,
so, and it's easy to say, well, okay, pull that up for me and show me how many are currently out of range. And show me yesterday how many were out of range. And you'll sometimes find that it's that central monitoring part that's not actually happening. They're
yeah,
connected, but not monitored.
where there's a mass
Um,
silencing of alarms. I've seen that, where they just click, 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 because they know they're not real or they don't think they're real. And I've seen that to silencing real alarms, which is why it's for me it's kind of a hot, pun intended, hot topic.
yeah.
Um,
Um, just a couple of other things. In the refrigerators and freezers, in your survey process guide and the tracer, I mean, it tells you to look for rust. And often you'll go into some of those walk-ins that have been around since the hospital was built, and you've got wire shelving that is rusted because there's a lot of moisture in there. And so certainly will call that out if I see rust on within the kitchen anywhere, any of the shelving that you're using for storing clean dishware or storing food, etc. And I think it's important to look at how you use or how you dispose of cardboard, but it becomes a real issue in food services. Certainly, when you are at the where they're preparing food and at the tray line where they are serving up the trays, there should be no corrugated cardboard. You ought to be able to take a picture of that station and not be able to see anywhere in that photograph corrugated cardboard, particularly from external shipping. When you get into into the freezer, and so you've got things that have come in, and those external cardboard boxes of frozen meats or whatever are placed inside that walk-in cooler. You're just taking a bunch of dirt into where you are storing food. And often you go in there, and Sue, I bet you've seen this, there are boxes that are opened up, and the plastic bag inside the box is opened up, and there's exposed meat, exposed food items in there,
Mhm.
with all this cardboard. Ideal situation would be there is no cardboard in those walk-ins. That everything is staged out of that into a plastic bin on those shelves. But I see a lot of pushback from the expense and the manpower required to do that conversion from the external shipping boxes, to put them into bins. But I think if you're going to allow it, then you should not be able to go into that walk-in freezer and see the open bags and exposed food. Everything should be covered to
Yeah.
protect it from the dirt, because cardboard just every time you open it up, you send dirt and dust out into the air. I think maybe one other thing I would like to mention, and I've hand it back over to Sue, but accuracy on the tray line and temperatures on the tray line are extremely important. And so I will look, and from an accuracy perspective, that you got different size ladles, and I'll talk to staff to say, talk to me about these ladles. What do the different colors mean? Because the handles often are different, are color coded, and make sure they understand that it all has to do with the different diets. And if I'm a diabetic diet, I might get mashed potatoes, but with the smaller scoop than if I'm a regular diet. And so I want to be sure they understand that they follow that process. Um, and also that there is someone that is reviewing every tray that's put together for the accuracy of the diet based on, they usually have a printout of this is what goes on this tray, and the portion size, because we can't be too generous. We have to, or we'll exceed whatever the diet manual says this patient ought to get,
Right.
and it makes a difference. It's like we can't just be approximate with the medication dose, you know,
Right.
because it matters. And there's some great software out there now, because there's everybody's doing room service, and you got your orders in the electronic record, you got the room service, and that links in, so a person can only order food for their dinner tonight based on that's going to match what's in their order, and then that comes out on a little card for the staff on the tray line to then match up and to use the right ladles, et cetera, to give them what they've requested, but in the proportions that are going to match based on their diet. And then it all even links to when I put this tray on this patient's tray table, I scan their wristband, And just like with medication errors, we prevent, giving the wrong, a wrong kind of diet to a patient. So some good stuff that has been developed for food services in the past few years that,
Mhm.
you know, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, so I
What,
know.
what's in your 50 cent tour, beyond looking at the where they have all the heat and the fryers and that kind of stuff?
Well, one thing I want to say before we completely leave that topic is that we have to look at if you've got a cafeteria serving line with a grill, we have to look at that the exact same way as we look at the kitchen. So don't just stop in the kitchen. We have to go to the cafeteria too. Now, other things that we find in the kitchen very frequently are issues with chemicals. First of all, chemicals in the kitchen are no different from chemicals anywhere else in the hospital. They have to be labeled appropriately. They have to have a safety data sheet. And if they are hazardous, they also have to have an eye wash that's accessible within 10 seconds without any obstructions. So we have to look at what chemicals they're using. Do they need an eye wash? And if so, where is that eye wash placed? Um, one thing that Another thing that happens with respect to cleanliness from the physical environment standard is we want to make sure that any doors to the outside, for example, to the loading dock, are gasketed because we have to keep out any pests that might want to try and get into that kitchen. So we're going to look at the doors to the outside. Um, like the clinical folks, we will probably also look at posted temperatures on refrigerators and freezers. And Howard did a good job of explaining all of that. But we also have to look at, are the days skipped if they're recording them manually? And another thing that I find frequently is that they don't have the temperature range on the recording sheets. So if the staff is recording a number, how do they know whether it's in or out? And even if you have a range, is that out of range temperature reported to someone? Sometimes it goes for days without being reported, and they just keep writing down the number that is clearly incorrect. So it's worthwhile taking a look at all those temperature charts, even for the dishwasher if they have it, just to make sure that staff know what they're doing when they're using those temperature recording charts. Um, Now, you mentioned shipping cardboard, Howard,
Mhm.
and I want to say that this tends to be really surveyor dependent. But some surveyors are asking in the dry storage area, um, what are you doing to reduce or eliminate
Yeah.
shipping cardboard in this area? Now, I've seen that done really, really well. Um, However, it's not an inexpensive process to get a lot of plastic bins and make sure everything is labeled for outdates and everything, but I
Mhm.
know it can be done. Um, my best advice to hospitals when I'm doing this kind of a building tour and they're full of cardboard in their dry storage area is I will say, okay, here's where you're making progress. Here's where you've still got room and opportunity for improvement, and be able to talk to the surveyors about what you're doing and where you're going with all of this. And again, those questions are really surveyor dependent. Couple of other things that I just want to mention is most cafeterias have a soda fountain kind of thing where they're dispensing soft drinks. So those take a carbon dioxide gas cylinder, and that has to be secured just as any gas cylinder of oxygen would be secured throughout the hospital. So make sure that that CO2 cylinder is is secured. Two more quick things. One is uh, for in your emergency operations plan, there's some statement, whatever that statement may be, about emergency food supplies. And so you want to follow that up in the kitchen to see what they have, how are they storing it, how are they checking for outdates, et cetera, et cetera. And lastly, in these walk-in refrigerators and freezers, you want to look at the sprinkler heads in there, make sure they're not rusty, make sure they're there. And also in those coolers, make sure that there's a process where you can open it from the inside in case of an emergency. You don't want to leave anybody in your freezer overnight.
And
So,
especially a surveyor.
especially a surveyor, that would be really bad.
Yeah.
That would be really bad. So, done very quickly, but I think that covers everything that
Oh, awesome.
had
Well,
planned to say about the kitchen.
go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, uh, Sue, you reminded me when you talked about the CO2 um, cylinders for the drink dispensers. That a lot of our hospitals are putting in place now are these newfangled machines for espresso and fancy coffee drinks. Um, and they have certain cleaning and sanitizing instructions for use. And I always ask to see the manual for that and how often do you have to descale it and do maintenance. And sometimes you get the deer in the headlights look, um, you know, but we're seeing some, new, just trying to keep up with what can you find on the road outside the grounds of the hospital as far as, coffee, pizza ovens, other
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of specialized pieces of equipment. And just like anywhere else in the hospital, patient safety and employee safety are primary. And so
So
you
do
got to
you
know
want
what
to
those
go into the
instructions for
dry
use
storage and
are.
look for dented cans?
Ah, yes. It's in the survey process guide, and it is a thing. You've got to pull those dented
And
cans
usually,
out
I mean,
of
that's one of
out
the
of
things that
service.
that's one of those needless gotchas that I always like to point out. It's like, don't have dented. Once I mean, you should never have dented cans in rotation anyway, right? But once you hear the surveyors are there, bring somebody in there and make sure you pull all the dented cans and put them in wherever the location is for the dented ones. But so as we coach people to be survey ready, um, awesome. Well, I appreciate anything else you guys want to add. I know we're kind of up against it time wise, but okay.
If I could take 2 minutes, and I'm sure that we have covered this in other kinds of sessions, but with this, and we've got hopefully a lot of good, food service leaders, tuning into this. Um, so if food service is a
Mm-hmm.
contract, and it very often is, surveyors are attracted to contract services like a lightning rod. And so the QAPI process should be, and usually the contract services are good at measuring the quality of what's going on within food services. So kudos for that. And it's one of the reasons you pay for a contract is to have people with that kind of expertise. But there is a requirement that the leaders of the organization evaluate that contract and their performance based on the expectations of the leaders. And so, if the timeliness of tray delivery is one of those expectations, and that's what the contract vendor is measuring, then that's great. Or if it's the customer satisfaction scores from your patients about food, that's great. But if you just want to figure out, and look to see what have the leaders said in their contract that this is how we'll evaluate this contract. What are our expectations? And then make sure that that contract gets evaluated periodically based on those expectations and is documented that that has happened and it's gone to the board. That's very, very important. And and sometimes we don't see that those expectations of the leadership that they have said
Yeah.
actually align with what's being measured. And so all that's got to fit together. But contracts are
Yeah,
definitely a
across the
lightning
board. We
rod
should probably
for
just do an episode on just
surveyors.
contracted
Mm.
services and what to look for. That's a good. I know we got a list
Oh,
of
yeah.
everything we're going to do. We might
Mhm.
we might sprinkle in some special editions instead of just doing them over Thursday. Easy for me to say. Well, I appreciate your time, your expertise. Appreciate those that tuned in and watched, and hopefully we got to your questions. If we didn't, we will certainly do our best to get to them in email.
Hmm.
Again, if you're a member of the Ready Now Connect and you want the CECs, let us know. We'll be happy to do that for you. And if you're not a member, let us know. We'd love to have you. So thank you both for your time, and we'll see you in the next one.
Mhm.
All right. Our pleasure.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.